To this day, stories about that period of time still bring up a lot of memories. I know that probably means that I need to maybe go into therapy and work some things through. You don't realize the work you're doing is important. You're just showing up day after day. It's only with time and distance that you can actually look back and see the experiences and the things that you went through. All of the people who died. I think these stories are important for people to know. I graduated nursing from Pasadena City College. There was still an undercurrent in the bars of this new gay disease that was striking a lot of people in New York or San Francisco. They called it GRID, which was gay-related immune deficiency, because it seemed to only be happening in the gay community. It took a long time before they even isolated the virus, so then you could actually test for it. Even then, back in those days, there was no treatment. I remember my very first introduction was in nursing school. I was in the emergency room following the doctors and the nurses. A guy had come in with a bad cough that wasn't going away. So they x-rayed him. One of the doctors said, "Do you see that scattering on both sides of the lungs?" I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "There's only one thing that makes that pattern, pneumocystis pneumonia." And he says, "Now I have to walk into a room and tell a very young man that he's going to die." That was kind of like my introduction into AIDS. Once I graduated, I started my nursing career in critical care. The stress of working in a critical care area is very real. Ultimately, hospital work wasn't for me. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I saw this little ad in the back of the want ads of the LA Times on Sunday edition, and it said, "HIV research nurse wanted. Call so-and-so at this number." So Monday morning I did. I called and I said, "What is this all about?" It was a tremendous cut in salary, but little did I know what I was actually getting myself signed up for. It was at LA County, and the clinic was called 5P21. And at the time, 5P21 was a small clinic in the outpatient building. We had so many clients that within 3 years, we had an entire 3-story building built just for AIDS patients. That's how prevalent it was in Los Angeles. We had its own pharmacy, we had its own labs, everything was self-contained within that building. Every drug that is out on the market has gone through clinical testing, meaning they have to give it to people to see if it's safe and effective, right? In various stages. And it takes a long time for drugs to develop, unless they're fast-tracked for certain diseases. HIV is one of them. Now, we were looking into all of the analogs of AZT, meaning things that are in the same class that AZT was. And at that time, AZT was given every 4 hours, round the clock. So they had to wake up at some point at night to take it again. One of my friends, who was HIV positive, told me a story, and he says, "Bill, I got to tell you what happened Saturday night." I said, "What?" He says, "I went to the opera." And I don't know if you remember, but back in the day, they used to have these pill containers that had an alarm thing that you could pre-program. So you could set the alarm on this and it would beep, 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 beep. And then you'd know that you'd take your ACT. So he says, "I was to the opera." And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Right around 10 p.m., just before the last aria, all you heard was beep, 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 all throughout the entire audience." And he and I just busted up laughing, and somebody was sitting at the table next to us. "What's so funny?" And he goes, "Gallows humor."
Wow.
But we're talking like late 80s. At that time, if you were found out to be HIV positive, a lot of companies would fire you. All insurance companies would stop covering you. They would kick you off. Didn't matter how long you'd been a member of that insurance or paid into your... Nope, that you were cut off immediately. There was, at the time, a fairly famous medical group out in the San Fernando Valley. Once you were kicked off your insurance, that medical group would have what we at 5P21 lovingly called the talk. Meaning, didn't matter how long they'd been a patient of that practice, they brought them in and they would give them the speech. We think that your disease has progressed past the point where we can effectively treat you. So we're going to recommend that you go to the LA County Hospital, meaning your insurance cut you off, so we're not going to get reimbursed for anything we do. So we're here to make money. You got to go. Bye. These men would be devastated. I mean, LA County was not exactly in the best of neighborhoods. And for somebody who has been very financially stable and well off and could afford the better things in life, all of a sudden has to come to a clinic, a free clinic. They would come, and then they were welcomed with the most incredible staff of nurses and doctors. We loved everybody. We were able to offer them things that they couldn't get at private clinics. We could offer them cutting edge at the time experimental therapy that they couldn't get anywhere else. Again, going back to the time of 5P21, you could be fired from your job. If a landlord didn't want you to live there, they could kick you out of the house. You know, if your boyfriends would kick you out if they found out you were HIV positive. We became everything to some of our patients. If they had no ability to pay, or they got kicked out of housing, they lost their job. We had social workers full-time in 5P21 that could tap into resources to help them find a place to live, to help them get Ryan White, which is government grant money, disability or Medicare, so that they could buy groceries. We had the ability to be that lifeline. We became the confidants. We became like, oh, you have to hear what happened this week. At a hospital, you're very focused on getting the meds in on time, doing these procedures on time, cleaning wounds, dressing wounds, bathing, cleaning the sheets, changing the sheets. You've got so many things that you need to do that sometimes that person lying in bed becomes an afterthought. So we had the ability to help them on multiple fronts. And it was a time when people needed that. Even most clinics of that day that you paid money for weren't providing some of the services that we were able to provide for gay men. During my time at 5P21, when you get gay men talking about sex, it tends to be a very open and honest conversation, to the point where some of the nurses were not ready to learn a lot of sexual practices of gay men, but you couldn't faze them after a while. You could try to be as raunchy as you could, and they would look at you like, that's the best you got? You think I haven't heard this before? so I give it up to the 5P21 nurses. They were just some of the best nurses ever. Yeah, we had another doctor who was a pulmonologist. Well, you're diagnosed with cancer, you're diagnosed with... The first question is, how long do I have to live? His standard response was, look, I've got 2 balls and neither one of them are crystal. I can't tell you how long you have to live. It could be 2 days. You could walk outside right now, get hit by a bus. Or you could live another 10, 15 years. During that time, we learned to take care of ourselves because nobody else was going to take care of us. We taught ourselves how to keep each other alive and how to keep ourselves alive. President Reagan never even said the word AIDS until Rock Hudson, family friend. Even then, it took a lot for them to come around and to even mention the word AIDS. That was like, what, year 7 of his administration? Who was the leader of NIAID at the time? Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci personally accelerated clinical research and was very instrumental with some of the activists to be able to curb pharmaceutical companies penchants for inflating costs of meds once they hit the market, right? The gay community can be forever grateful to them, forever. Yeah, they were in your face, but at the time, we needed that kind of activism because nobody else was going to help us. There was still no cure. AZT was a miracle. It kept them alive, but ultimately they were going to die. No matter how much a healthcare professional tries to keep that professional distance between you and your patient, right? There's always those one or two or three that just get past that wall, and it destroys you when they die. It hurts so much. It really took an emotional toll going to funerals. So I had to stop that. I could name you like 2 or 3 people. I still know their names. 40 years later, I still know their names. They had that much of an impact on me. Protease inhibitors came along and people stopped dying. I left 5P21, the pharmaceutical company that I went to work in San Diego. The main focus was nelfinavir. It had a unique resistance profile. We started out with 3 times a day dosing, and then we ended up being able to change labeling to twice a day using. Now remember, in those days, we started out with AZT, you had to take it every 4 hours. So taking something once a day was like the holy grail that we were trying to starve for in clinical research. We were trying to find something that you just needed to take once a day. Twice a day dosing was like unheard of. That was another sort of like change that I was seeing throughout time, and I got to help make that change from 3 times a day to twice a day. AIDS in third world countries is prevalent, but what was unique about the Dominican Republic is that it had the second largest sex trade industry outside of Thailand. And in the Dominican Republic, AIDS is heterosexually transmitted due to the sex trade. All of the drugs that were approved at that time were all approved in the Dominican Republic, but nobody could afford them. So I took the job. I went down to the Dominican Republic and organized the existing facilities on the island to support clinical research. The doctor down there is Jay Levy's sister. He was one of the first doctors to do some of the earliest epidemiological studies on HIV. And he was the one that recognized that there was this epidemic going through the gay community. And it looked like the entry point into the Western Hemisphere was coming through Haiti. Dominican Republic is on the same island as Haiti. So he called his sister up and he said, I need you to just draw blood on anybody you possibly can. We need blood samples from everybody and anybody. Go out in the fields, whoever you do. So her name appears on some of the very earliest epidemiological studies done with HIV and AIDS. So she wanted to create a clinic. So she worked with this company who hired me to go down there and help her do that. And that I worked down there for like 6 months. I think it's important that people understand what we went through and hear the stories. From knowing our history, we were able to reorganize and do what we needed to do to protect and heal ourselves. And then we moved on. I wish that young gays and lesbians and anybody from the queer community coming up could learn our history. I lived through it. I lost friends. I lost tens of, if not a couple hundred patients in my 4 years that I was there. Or helped create a couple of AIDS quilts. I was able to help friends that would call me up in crisis. Gay life changed because of AIDS. I like to think that I had a very small hand, and continue to this day for multiple diseases and things, have done a small part in helping people live longer.